Stop for just a moment. Not to analyze. Not to judge. Just stop and feel. Because, if you are hearing this now, something inside you already knows. There are experiences the soul passes through that leave no visible evidence. No dramatic collapse. No clear ending. Only a quiet rearranging of the inner world. You may have called it exhaustion, hors maturity, or simply moving on. But Carl Jung understood something deeper, that certain people undergo a hidden initiation. A psychological death, so subtle it often goes unrecognized, until long after it has occurred. This is not a test everyone faces. And those who do rarely speak of it, because the language of this transformation does not belong to the surface world. This threshold is not crossed in moments of success or clarity. It is crossed in confusion, in prolonged uncertainty, in the kind of suffering that cannot be explained away or fixed by effort. The soul is not tested by how much pain it can endure, but by whether it can reorganize itself in the presence of pain. Jung believed that when the psyche reaches a point where old coping structures fail, a deeper intelligence begins to operate. What feels like breaking is often the psyche dissolving what can no longer carry you forward. If you have crossed this threshold, your life did not become easier. It became truer. The first sign that this painful crossing has already happened is not strength in the conventional sense. It is your changed relationship with silence. There was a time when silence felt dangerous. When being alone meant being confronted by thoughts you did not yet know how to hold. You may have filled space with noise, obligation, constant engagement, anything that prevented you from feeling too deeply. But somewhere along the way, silence stopped attacking you. It stopped exposing you. It became a place you could enter without fear. Not because the pain disappeared, but because you learned how to stay present with yourself without needing to escape. This shift is subtle, but profound. Silence no longer amplifies your wounds. It softens them. You notice that you no longer seek constant reassurance to feel grounded. You are less reactive to being unseen or misunderstood. The inner world that once felt chaotic now feels navigable. Jung saw this as a sign that the ego has loosened its grip and the deeper self has begun to speak. When silence becomes tolerable, then meaningful, then necessary, it is because you no longer abandon yourself when nothing external is holding you together. The second sign emerges not as peace, but as honesty. À some point, life forced you to face aspects of yourself you could no longer deny. Not through self-improvement, not through intention, but through circumstance. You were cornered emotionally, stripped of excuses, left without the energy to maintain a false image of who you were supposed to be. This is where the shadow appears, not as an enemy, but as a truth you can no longer avoid. You encountered your anger without letting it consume you. You acknowledged your envy without drowning in shame. You recognized your capacity for control, manipulation, withdrawal, or intensity without collapsing into self-rejection. Jung called this shadow integration, one of the most difficult psychological processes a human can undergo. Most people never complete it. They spend their lives projecting these disowned traits onto others. But you did not run. You stayed. You allowed yourselves on jet, only count only light. You are also sharp, powerful, complex, and capable of harm. And instead of being destroyed by this realization, you became whole. This integration changes, your presence. You no longer feel the need to appear harmless. You no longer confuse goodness with self-erasure. Your anger becomes discernment. Your intensity becomes clarity. Your pain becomes insight. People may not know why they feel steadier around you, but they do. Because you are no longer divided within yourself. Wholeness has a gravity that does not announce itself. The third sign reveals itself in how you relate to other people's emotions. Before this inner crossing, you may have been deeply entangled in the emotional lives of others. Their distress felt like your responsibility. Their reactions felt like your fault. You absorbed moods, crises, and expectations without realizing how much of yourself you were losing in the process. Jung believed that much of human suffering arises from projection. The unconscious habit of placing unresolved inner conflicts onto others. Before transformation, these projections pull us into endless emotional labor. After crossing the threshold, something shifts. Not into coldness, but into clarity. You begin to recognize when someone is responding not to you, but to their own unhealed wounds. You notice when blame is misplaced, when guilt is transferred, when chaos is offered as intimacy, and instead of you step back, calmly, without explanation, without resentment. This distance is not rejection. It is emotional sovereignty. Drama loses its seductive power. Unstable dynamics no longer feel meaningful. You stop chasing understanding from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop trying to heal those who refuse to face themselves. This does not mean you care less. It means your compassion has matured. You no longer confuse empathy with self-sacrifice. Jung saw this as a critical stage of individuation, the moment when a person stops living from unconscious obligation and begins living from conscious choice. The fourth sign arrives quietly, but it is unmistakable. Your intuition sharpens in a way that feels almost unsettling. Decisions that once required excessive thinking now arrive with a calm certainty. You sense when something is wrong long before evidence appears. You feel when a connection will drain you before it does. Coincidences cluster around you with an accuracy that defies logic. Jung referred to this as alignment with the self, the deeper organizing center of the psyche that emerges when the ego is no longer fighting for control. This intuition is not mystical fantasy. It is psychological integration. When the conscious and unconscious mind begin to communicate without obstruction, perception becomes refined. You are no longer fragmented, so your awareness gathers itself. Where you once relied on external validation, you now trust internal signals. You listen to the tightening in your chest, the subtle pull toward or away from choices, the clarity that appears in stillness. This is not impulsivity. It is inner coherence. The final sign is the most visible, yet the least understood by others. You become fiercely protective of your energy. Not out of fear, but out of respect for what you have survived. Before this transformation, your energy leaked through people-pleasing, overgiving, rescuing, and staying too long in places that diminished you. You mistook endurance for loyalty. You confused self-sacrifice with love. But something in you has closed that door. Now, you choose carefully where your time, attention, and emotional presence go. You withdraw from conversations that circle endlessly without growth. You leave environments that dull your spirit. You say no without over-explaining. There is no guilt in this, only clarity. You understand that not everyone deserves access to you. Not every invitation is aligned. Not every emotional request is yours to answer. Jung described this as the crown of individuation, energetic sovereignty. People may perceive this as distance. They may say, you have changed. And they are right. But this change is not loss of warmth. It is the presence of self-respect. When your energy is no longer scattered, it becomes concentrated. Your presence becomes grounded, calm, and unmistakably strong. Others feel that you belong to yourself now. If these signs resonate, then something important has already happened within you. You did not simply endure pain. You were reorganized by it. The old identity that once defined you, built from survival, adaptation, and expectation, has dissolved. What emerged in its place is quieter, but infinitely more stable. Jung believed that individuals who complete this inner passage become anchors in the collective psyche. Not because they speak loudly, but because they are no longer ruled by unconscious fear. Your past no longer controls you. Your wounds no longer dictate your choices. Your inner world no longer frightens you. You have undergone a second psychological birth. And now, the task is not to explain yourself, prove anything, or return to who you were. The task is simply to live from this new center. To honor the truth that revealed itself in your darkest moments. To walk forward with the quiet power of someone who has met themselves fully. If you recognize yourself here, you are not alone. And you never were.